October 14, 1990, 3:47 p.m. Inside Mountain Studios in Montreux, Switzerland, a small red light flickered on above the recording booth. Recording in progress. The air was heavy, still electric. Behind the glass, Freddie Mercury stood motionless, one hand gripping the microphone stand like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His once powerful frame had withered to 99 pounds. The vibrant performer who once commanded stadiums could barely stand without trembling. Engineer David Richards quietly set his vodka bottle down on the console. He knew this wasn't just another recording session, it was history in motion. The first take lasted 23 seconds before Freddie's voice cracked. He coughed, blood staining the tissue in his hand. The room went silent. Roger Taylor froze. Brian May dropped his pick. Jim Beach rushed inside, panic on his face. "Freddie, maybe we should—" Freddie cut him off, raising one finger, eyes blazing with defiance. "I'll fucking do it, darling." Those were the words that reignited the session, and history. What followed over the next 47 minutes would become the most sacred, sealed secret in Queen's archives. A recording so personal, so raw, that only 4 people ever heard it in full. 42 minutes and 29 seconds locked away, still waiting to be revealed. But to understand the power of that final moment, we must go back 3 months earlier, to Garden Lodge. July 1990, London, Garden Lodge. Freddie Mercury sat at his piano in the quiet of dawn, the air filled with faint birdsong and the sound of his trembling fingers brushing ivory keys. His hands, once lightning fast, could now barely press a C major chord without shaking. Jim Hutton stood by the doorway, worried. "Maybe you should rest, love," Jim whispered. Freddie shook his head. "No, darling. Brian's coming tomorrow. I need to have something to show him." He kept playing through the night, his body weak, but his spirit refusing to surrender. Neighbors later said they could hear faint piano notes at 3 a.m. The last hours Freddie ever composed in solitude. When Brian May arrived the next morning, he found Freddie pale but smiling. "Listen to this," Freddie said softly, and played just 8 notes, a haunting melody filled with both hope and farewell. Brian froze. It wasn't just music. It was goodbye in disguise. He wiped a tear from his cheek. Freddie laughed. "Don't be so dramatic, darling. It's just a song." But both men knew better. When Brian left Garden Lodge, he carried with him a single sheet of paper, 8 notes and 1 sentence, scribbled in Freddie's shaky handwriting, "The show must go on." That paper would soon become Queen's final anthem, and Freddie's last message to the world. August 1990. Dr. Gordon Atkinson called Queen's manager Jim Beach. "If Freddie wants to record anything more, it must be now," he warned. "Within a month, he may lose his voice entirely." Jim immediately contacted the band. The secret project was codenamed Project Phoenix, the last attempt to let Freddie's voice rise one final time. Roger Taylor arrived first at Mountain Studios. When he saw Freddie, he froze. His friend looked ghostly, his cheekbones sharp as blades. But Freddie smiled, masking the pain with his usual wit. "Darling, I'm just preparing for my Vogue cover." Roger tried to laugh, but his hands were trembling as he set up the drums. John Deacon stayed silent, but Freddie noticed the fear in his eyes. "Don't worry, Deaky," he said gently. "I'm not going anywhere. Not yet." The first recording attempts were heartbreaking. Freddie sang one line, coughed violently, and collapsed into the chair. Blood stained the tissues in his hand. Every night, his assistant Phoebe burned those tissues at Freddie's request. "I don't want my fans to remember me like this," he said. The sessions were chaos, pain, and persistence. But Freddie refused to stop. "As long as I can make a sound," he whispered. Then the show's still on. And 1 month later, the miracle happened. September 15th, 1990. When Freddie entered the studio that day, something had changed. His energy was magnetic, his eyes bright again. "Morning, darlings," he said with a grin. "Let's make some bloody music." What followed was 6 straight hours of magic. Freddie sang Mother Love, A Winter's Tale, and fragments of songs that had no names, melodies born from exhaustion, courage, and love. His voice was rough, fragile, but full of fire. Brian May later wrote in his diary, "Freddie is dying, but what I saw today wasn't death. It was resurrection." Roger couldn't stop crying behind his drum kit. John played bass without saying a word, every note a goodbye. During a break, Freddie looked at them and said quietly, "You know, dying isn't that bad, but leaving songs unfinished, that's what kills me." He took a sip of vodka, winked, and added, "So let's make sure they don't." That night, David Richards said he felt like the studio walls were vibrating with life. It was like Freddie had borrowed energy from the universe itself. But behind that smile, Freddie knew the truth. His body was failing fast. He was racing against time and losing. Yet there was one last secret he hadn't told anyone. Months later, Peter Phoebe Freestone revealed something astonishing. In June 1990, Freddie had handed him a handwritten list titled, "Before I Go." 17 items. 14 were unfinished songs. One was a gift for Jim Hutton. One, a final letter to Mary Austin. And the last one, Phoebe never revealed. "Freddie made me swear not to tell," he said. Some of the songs were destroyed by Freddie himself. 4 pages of handwritten sheet music were burned in the fireplace of Garden Lodge. "Some things," Freddie said, "should only exist in Heaven's playlist." That night he sat on his bed with an old photo album. Pictures from the Bohemian Rhapsody era. Freddie stared at his younger self, smiling under stage lights. "Look at me, Phoebe," he said softly. "I was invincible," he closed the album. "Tomorrow," he added, "I'll be invincible one last time." Phoebe thought it was a metaphor. But 4 days later, Freddie recorded something no one's ever heard. A secret conversation that even death couldn't silence. Because on October 10, 1990, Freddie Mercury decided to talk to God. It was 2 in the morning when Freddie entered Mountain Studios, wrapped in a coat and scarf, pale as moonlight. David Richards, the sound engineer, was waiting. Only him. Freddie had paid him $500 to keep it secret. For 3 hours, Freddie sat at the piano and spoke, sometimes whispering, sometimes singing. He talked about his fears, his regrets, his loves. He asked questions no one could answer. Have I done enough? Have I loved enough? Will they remember me when the lights go out? When the session ended, David labeled the tape, "Freddie's Conversation with God, October 10, 1990. According to his will, that recording cannot be played until 50 years after his death. If it survives, the world will hear it in 2041. David's widow later revealed he described the recording as Freddie's confession to the universe. She said, "He poured everything into it. Love, fear, music, silence." 4 days later, Freddie returned to the studio ready for the final battle. He didn't tell anyone about the secret tape. He didn't have to. You could hear it in his voice. That night, he whispered to Jim Hutton, "Tomorrow, darling, the curtain rises for the last time." October 14, 1990, morning. Freddie woke up trembling but alert. "Jim," he said softly, "I had a dream. I was on stage again. Wembley. The crowd was singing, but I couldn't hear them, just saw their faces. They were crying." He called Mary Austin. They spoke for 47 minutes. Mary never shared the details. "It was like he was closing an account," she said years later, "counting everyone and everything that ever mattered." Before leaving for the studio, Freddie stood by the window overlooking Lake Geneva. The water shimmered silver under a pale sun. "Do you believe in God, Jim?" he asked quietly. Jim hesitated. "I don't know." Freddie smiled faintly. "Me neither. But today, I hope he believes in me." When he got into the car, he asked the driver to stop by the lake. For 10 minutes he sat in silence, eyes closed, wind on his face. Witnesses said he looked at peace. He arrived at the studio just before 3 p.m., carrying only his courage, his lyrics, and a half-empty bottle of vodka. Everyone stood as he entered. "Please, darlings," he said. "No drama. We have work to do." And with that, the red light came on. The final recording began. The moment the red light blinked, the room held its breath. Freddie's pulse was racing, his lungs failing, but his eyes blazed with that old defiance. "Ready, Fred?" Brian asked. Freddie lifted the vodka bottle, took a swig, and said, "I'll fucking do it, darling. Take one. 23 seconds. Coughing, blood, silence. Take 2. 1 minute and 17 seconds. Inside my heart is breaking." His voice cracked, but his spirit didn't. "Take 3. The full song. 4 minutes and 31 seconds of pure immortal sound. One take, perfect." But Freddie didn't stop. "Again," he said. For the next 42 minutes and 29 seconds he sang, whispered, shouted, cried. He talked to Brian, Roger, and John between takes. To Brian, "Your guitar spoke when I couldn't." To Roger, "Every beat was my heartbeat." To Dikey, "You quiet genius, you were the soul we never knew we needed." Then he sat at the piano. With trembling hands, he played a melody no one has ever heard since, 3 minutes of something like prayer. And when he finished, he whispered to himself, almost inaudible, "The show must go on." That was Freddie Mercury's true farewell. When everyone left that night, Freddie stayed behind with David Richards. For 20 minutes they talked quietly. David never revealed what was said, but after his death his diary was found. One line stood out. Freddie told me his biggest regret that he hid too long, but maybe his music was his truth all along. The next morning, Freddie called Mary Austin. "It's done," he said. "The song?" she asked. "My goodbye," he replied. 2 days later, he called David again. "There's a tape in my piano bench. Red label. Please, put it with the other one." David went to Garden Lodge and found it exactly where Freddie said. The label read, September 5th, 1946, November 24th, 1991. Freddie had written the date 2 days before his death. No one knows what's on that tape. Some say it's his last will. Others say it's new music. But those who've seen it say Freddie wrote one final message on the envelope. For when the world is ready. 3 days after Freddie's funeral, Queen's remaining members each received a package. Inside, a cassette. Brian's contained Freddie awkwardly strumming guitar. Roger's, Freddie playing drums. John's, bass. The recordings were terrible, but the message was clear. I tried to be each of you. I couldn't, because you're irreplaceable. Years later, Brian revealed that Freddie once told him, "When I'm gone, don't mourn the silence. Celebrate the songs that live." In 2010, Roger Taylor shared another secret from that final session. After he finished the song, Freddie didn't move. He just breathed into the mic and whispered, "I forgive you all. I hope you forgive me." The room went ice cold. John Deacon, long retired, sent Brian a letter in 2020. "I see Freddie in my dreams," it read. "He's still singing, but not in pain. He tells me, 'The show went on, Dikey, just like I promised.' Rumor says those 42 minutes will be released in 2040, exactly 50 years after they were recorded. The same year Freddie believed the world would finally be ready to hear him, unfiltered, unmasked, and eternal. Today Mountain Studios still stands. Studio 16, the room where Freddie sang his final words, remains locked by Queen's request. A small plaque on the door reads, "The music lives forever," but engineers who work there swear that every October 14th they hear faint piano notes from behind the door. A whisper, a chord, a laugh. Maybe it's an echo. Maybe it's Freddie. In that 42-minute tape, at the 31-minute mark, Freddie's tired voice says something that still gives chills to those who've heard it. "You know what? I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of being forgotten. But every time someone sings my songs, I live again. And that, darlings, is immortality. So if you're watching this and you've ever sung along to Bohemian Rhapsody or Don't Stop Me Now, then Freddie Mercury still lives through you. If you want these stories to keep living, if you believe legends never really die, subscribe, comment your favorite Queen song below, and let Freddie's voice echo a little longer. Because some shows never end, some lights never go out, and Freddie Mercury's, it still burns forever.